All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. For those of you that have joined us before, welcome back. For those of you, the new viewers, welcome. This is our weekly interview series that we do for the Cream Candy World Orchestra. And today, I'm going to move my chair so I can see you better. Today we have the wonderful trumpeter and educator Jared Hall with us, joining us for an interview. So we're very glad to have him here. He's been here in the Northwest for several years now, teaching and performing and playing and making quite a name for himself here in the Pacific Northwest. So Jared, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kareem. I appreciate it, man.
Of course, of course. Well, I'd like to get started with figuring out how you got into music. What started you playing music? And you were born in Spokane?
Yeah, I was born in Spokane, Washington. That's where I grew up, and kind of on the north side of Spokane. And, my dad played piano, so I got to hear piano all the time. He was practicing, and he'd play when I would take naps as a young kid. And so I think that definitely had an impact on just getting interested in music. And then, like most kids, 5th, 6th grade, you get a chance to pick up an instrument usually. So started in beginning band, 5th grade, 10 years old. My mom got me this trumpet. It was pretty beat up. It was like rent to own, but I was thankful for it, and I just... I enjoyed it, but a story I like to tell my students who get discouraged with the instrument is that I couldn't make a sound for like a week. And what I would do is I'd fake like I was playing, So you can't really get away with it, but I'd actually sing the notes that the other kids could play. And I got really frustrated, and I complained to my mom. I was like, I'm going to quit. This isn't working. She called the director, who at the time... kind of helped me. He took me aside and helped me work through that. And somehow I stuck with it, And his name's Brian Bogue, by the way. He still lives in Spokane, great teacher. And if it wasn't for him, like kind of helping me along, I would have just probably quit right away. And so I kind of started in the beginning band program there and had a lot of great directors kind of moving me forward through the different programs. Another one was Dave Jewett, who I think taught up here for a little bit. At one point, that was in middle school. And then my mom ended up getting remarried, and so I moved out of Spokane to Chattaroy and went to Riverside High School. And there, a very small school, not anything renowned about the program. Nothing really special. And during this whole time, I didn't take lessons or anything. I was actually so ignorant, I didn't even know lessons were a thing. And even if I knew, we couldn't afford it, right? So I was in the high school program there, and I had a really great band director who influenced me. His name was Michael Jones. Always think about him because he really helped push me forward. He played trumpet as well, really great trumpet player, great educator, motivator, and we had a lot of great conversations. And also Dave Sanborn was also an influence. He was my director for about a year or two, and he sold me like this Bach Stradivarius trumpet that he didn't use anymore. And it was a great deal, and I had to earn the money to pay for it. And so I was really thankful to have this professional trumpet. So that motivated me all the way through high school. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'm curious. So you said your father played piano. Did he play just like any kind of tune, any songs or styles, or was he just for enjoyment, or he was a full-time musician as well, or?
Yeah, he was a full-time musician as well, teaching piano, and he's got a great ear. I don't know if it's perfect pitch exactly, but he can play anything by ear. So we would, as me and my sister, we'd watch like Aladdin, and he could just play the Aladdin theme, or Beauty and the Beast, and he could do that with anything. And he studied a lot of classical music. He'd play Chopin, he'd play Bach, he'd play Beethoven, all the classical pieces. And I still I don't know all that music, but when I hear it, I recognize it from those early days. So he was, he play everything really. He doesn't play a lot of jazz, but sometimes he'll put some show tunes together and just kind of play some melodies. And And he got a master's in music as well, and has taught and played in a lot of different settings in Spokane.
Wonderful. Well, so then I'm curious, all these different people that we're interviewing, how they kind of got their start and either from parents or not from parents or record collections or whatnot. Did your parents listen to a lot of music while you were growing up?
Yeah, there was music being played in both households, different types of music. So Prince, Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, like a lot of pop, Beatles. We're big Beatles fans. Mostly just pop music, like older pop at this time, because this was like the 90s, right? So I dug all that music, and then I'd listen to stuff on the radio, whatever like the pop channel was on my own time, at a certain, a little bit of that. And my mom would listen to like Tina Turner, and she'd listen to Gloria Estefan, kind of some great pop vocals there, in different styles. And, and then the jazz really started with my band director, Mike Jones. And he's like, well, he gave me a copy of the Sidewinder, Lee Morgan's album, The Sidewinder. It's like it was like a hit, right, at the time. And so no one had given me like a jazz record, right? Until that point. And so I just listened to that one record, and then I bought all the Lee Morgan records I could find at Barnes and Nobles or Borders bookstore, whatever it was, and I'd spend all my own money to get these records and listen to a lot of it. And my grandparents started to see also that I enjoyed playing the trumpet. They gave me Kinda Blue. Again, I had no idea what it was, but we all pretty much know what it was. And so they gave me Kinda Blue, and so I listened to that and got to the point where I memorized everybody's solos, and then I just had the idea, like, let's play along with Miles, and it was terrible. Like, I'm missing notes and I'm getting things wrong, but I'm just trying to copy what he's doing. And this is when I'm like 13 or 14. It's before I know that you're supposed to do that. Yes. That you're supposed to transcribe and learn by ear. And then from there, I just kind of bought all sorts of trumpet records, stuff that I'd see at Borders. They had demos you could listen to like 30 seconds, and then you could decide to buy it. Right.
The good old days. Well, I mean, it's different now. I mean, now you can listen to anything you want, so I guess, but the artists don't get paid, so who knows how good they are. But, okay, well, I'm curious then. So you mentioned Lee Morgan. You mentioned Miles Davis. So as a young, early teen musician checking things out, who were some of the musicians, aside from the two gentlemen that you listed, that you kind of gravitated towards as you kind of expanded your horizons?
Yeah, in those early days, it was like just the names you'd see on the shelves. So like there were Chris Bodie records, so I bought those. And he's got a great sound, a great trumpet player. Some people have a lot of opinions about his musical style, but you can't deny that he's an incredible trumpet player and musician. Terence Blanchard, so I picked up his records. A bunch of Miles, a lot of Miles that I could find. Trying to think from there. Those were like the main. So a couple contemporary and some older musicians. It wasn't until much later I started to like figure out about the early beboppers like Fats Navarro and Kenny Dorham and who was I going to say? Clifford Brown was a bit later. Like some really important forces that came much later. So that's kind of what I started with, I'd say. But as I got into like undergraduate school, I started to get hip to a lot more music and a lot more artists.
I'm curious, with your father playing piano, did he? I know you play trumpet. Do you play piano as well?
I wouldn't call myself a piano player. I never took lessons. I never got that kind of instruction. I just heard it, but I do use the piano, probably like you, like more as a tool for composition teaching. I think it's important if you're going to become a jazz musician to get some piano skills together, just to be able to comp, see all the harmony. If you're a single line instrumentalist, you can't really see the chords and hear the chords in succession like you can on the piano. So I use it in that capacity, but I I wouldn't want to back anybody up, probably.
Well, no, I'm sure you could just fine. But it's funny to me, like, all these musicians that professed you should learn some piano. Dizzy Gillespie being one of them, who played beautiful piano. I understand Miles played piano. Clifford Brown played some piano. Even John Coltrane, Eric Dolphy, Sonny Stitt. All these, everybody at some point plays a little bit, dabbles enough to get around and hear concepts and hear ideas and things. Which is a nice segue, because I believe you have a book, which is the piano grip system.
Yeah, it's called the Piano Grip System, an approach to learning jazz harmony. And you're absolutely right. All those artists you mentioned were also composers, great composers, some more understated than others, and I think the piano has a lot to do with that, And this book, this method, this whole learning approach to harmony came out of my studies at the University of Miami with Whit Sidener, who was the previous director of jazz studies there. And he'd been teaching this method by ear, just at a piano, people watching him and listening and asking questions, and he'd have students come and sit. And he's been teaching this for like 25, 30 years. And he retired, I think, in 2013. So I was able to take the class, and I'm in the class, and everybody's taking notes frantically and doing videos and trying to capture all this stuff, right? And so one summer, I was doing cruise ships, and I was like, I need a project while I'm on this boat. So I started writing all this stuff out because I didn't want to forget it, because I knew I'd forget it, right? And so I took my notes and started transcribing these exercises, putting together text, and then all of a sudden it started becoming this project, which ended up being my dissertation, which ended up being a book. Because this material isn't just, I kid, but I wrote the book for me, in essence, so I wouldn't forget the material, so I'd continue to learn it, and I still learn from it, and to share it with others. And it comes out of kind of the legacy that Whit left at Miami. It wasn't just his teaching, it was his directing, it was his arranging. The band there has a bunch of records, studio records, that were really well known. It was part of the Miami scene. So I just thought that was really important to define and put together. And he's since moved away from Miami. He's retired. And so I didn't want the teaching to get lost either. And I want to kind of like move that forward in whatever I can, and to help people learn and grow from it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I want to backtrack. We're going to jump all around because my brain's like, go here. I'm going to go back to high school. So you're checking out these records and playing along with them. You've got a couple instructors now that you've had that are good teachers and giving you good information. Did you ever, while still in high school, middle school, take private lessons at all from anyone?
I didn't. Nothing at all. It was just my director, my band director, Mike Jones. He gave me some ideas. He's like, you should check out the Arbin book, or here's Clark 2. These are all things that trumpet players know about, but no formal instruction, no one-on-one. Let's meet, let's do some exercises. So I was pretty much self-taught at that point. I played lead in the big band. I didn't do a lot of soloing, but I kind of like dabbled a little bit. And so it wasn't until I got into college that I started to kind of work that out. And another story that a lot of people don't know about is I originally went to the University of Idaho, and I was studying with Bob McCurdy there. And actually, I wasn't even studying with him. I was just taking lessons because I was enrolled in the architecture program. So I was doing a lot of art, right? So I was always kind of creative-minded when I was a kid. I draw a lot and paint a lot. And I found myself spending more time in the music building, and I took some theory classes because I wanted to do a little bit of that, maybe do a music minor, and some ear training classes. And I was spending a lot of time practicing, and I was like, well, I'm spending way more time doing this than in the art building, so maybe I need to reassess what my path is, right? And then, he let me know I was the most improved student in the studio, even though I was terrible. I was still terrible. Like, I didn't realize how bad I was. I just liked the trumpet, right? And so he was really great to kind of take me on because I wasn't a major, and then I wanted to become a major, but there wasn't the funding for it because I was kind of like trying to figure out how to pay for school because it was very expensive, right? And so I ended up applying to Whitworth University and got a great scholarship opportunity there. I moved back in with my folks to save money, way cheaper for a 4-year degree. And so I kind of finished my degree at Whitworth, and I studied with Dan Keberle, who, again, a tremendous force in my early development, because he saw that my embouchure was not correct. My setup, my lips, my corners, my formation on how to play the trumpet and make a good trumpet sound, right? And so he basically said, we need to reset your embouchure, and it took about a year, and I was a sophomore. It was very, very discouraging. I take some high schoolers through this now because I can kind of teach it because I've been through it. And but that was really important because I wasn't going to play at the highest level. It was really important for me to make that change. And so he was a big force, and I got to learn a little bit more about improvisation. But you have to understand, I'm 19 years old, and I'm sitting there playing Dorian scales, like really slowly. When you have kids, I'm sure I have kids, and kids in this region, it's like they do Dorian scales when they're like 12 years old or 10 years old, maybe, They're playing bebop tunes when they're 14, 15, 16. I was not that kid,
I understand. Yeah, it causes crippling depression for all of us all the time. Okay, well, so then how did you go from, well, actually, I want to back up. So the scene in Spokane, and forgive me, the other city that you moved to after Spokane was Chatterley, did you say?
Chatteroy. Just north of Spokane, about 20 minutes.
Gotcha.
Pretty much close to Spokane.
Okay, was there much of a music scene around growing up when you were starting playing?
Yeah. So while I was in school, there was a club called Ellis Supper Club in Spokane. Yeah, and that was a place where they would play jazz, right? And Dan would play there, and some other faculty would play there, like Brent Edstrom, his trio. He plays piano, incredible theory player, pianist, and he would play. And me and a buddy of mine, we would go to Ella's, and they'd graciously let us sit in. And we were sad, but they let us sit in we'd play Summertime or something, and I'd go there and listen to other groups. Eventually that closed pretty quickly, I think. Maybe when I graduated, it closed. And I stayed in Spokane, and I was already starting to work, actually, when I was 19 and 20. Dan gave me some leads, and then I got connected with a band in Spokane. And again, I'm really thankful for these kind of experiences. Even though I don't talk about them a lot now, is I got hooked up with a band called 6 Foot Swing, and that was led by Heather Vila. And I'm just like this 20-year-old kid. I probably shouldn't even be in a lot of these clubs because you got to be of age, And I got connected with them, and they played a lot. A lot for Spokane, a lot for me being a kid. They would play 4 to 6 times a month. And I'd make pretty good money as a 20-year-old or whatever, And I also learned a lot of lessons, like how to back up a vocalist, right? The difference between playing jazz and playing swing. There's certain things you shouldn't be doing. And so I got a lot of lessons out of that experience. And I played with them for about 3 years. They were voted like the top band in the Northwest. Multiple years, many awards, a couple records. And so there is a scene there. I don't know about it now, but there is a scene there. I sat in with the Spokane Jazz Orchestra, similar to the SRJO here. Mm-hmm. They do a concert series, so I got to sit in with them a little bit. Also, trying to spacing on his name, Kurnow. Bob Kurnow, lives in the area, and so he has a band. And it was like a rehearsal band, and I'd sit in with them. And that was really humbling because it's all these professors and all these band directors and these teachers and monster players, and here I am playing third trumpet. But it's like, well, it's good to be here. It's good to be the worst one here, So those kind of experiences really helped me grow and learn and start to become a professional musician.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Well, so how did you go from how did you end up from the Northwest over in University of Miami was the next step, correct?
The next step was actually Indiana University. Yeah, so when I graduated, I just worked in the city in Spokane. I did a bunch of teaching. I was a lifeguard. I was a manager of the YMCA part-time, and I taught lessons, and I did gigs, and I directed a church choir. And so I did anything I could do musically, but I had to do something else at the time as well. And I did that for a couple of years, and I knew I always wanted to kind of like move to something where I could really get my butt kicked, and I could learn something new and be in a situation that wasn't always so comfortable. And I knew it needed to maybe be out of the area. And so I was looking at like big music schools that I had heard of and talked to people about, like Eastman, University of Illinois, Boulder, Colorado, Boulder, Indiana University, all these different schools. And so I applied to graduate school, and I like totally didn't get accepted. I think I got waitlisted, or, hey, you can pay all this money if you want to go. And so I didn't go. And I said, okay, that's the sign that I'm not up to par. So I kept practicing. I kept working on the craft. And eventually I got an opportunity, a scholarship opportunity to go to Indiana, and then became a teaching assistant there, which helped really pay for my schooling there. So I went and did a couple years there. Got a master's in jazz studies, and at the time David Baker was there, kind of a legendary jazz pedagogue, if people aren't familiar with him. Played with George Russell's band, and I was in David Baker's last jazz band there before he kind of retired, and he had some health problems there towards the end as well. And I got to study with Pat Harbison a little bit, who's a great jazz trumpet player there, and he kind of gave me some nice tools to kind of work with some of the Caruso concepts I teach today. And then my main trumpet teacher was Joey Tartell, who continued to enforce like just technique and sounding good on the trumpet, getting around the horn fluidly. Yeah. And because I was taking all the jazz classes, that I needed to get all those concepts, but I needed to get the horn together. So, and there's not much to do in Bloomington. It's just a college town, right? And I was a little older, so I wasn't necessarily into like trying to go party or trying to go waste my time in other ways, right? I was very much like, I am going to get this stuff together for 2 years, So I went to class, and I taught when I needed to assist the professors, and I practiced. That's all I did, And that was probably the biggest time where I really improved.
Yeah. Well, I know that Indiana as a whole has a rich jazz history. Off the top of my head, I know Freddie Hubbard from Indianapolis. Seattle's Brian Kirk is from Indianapolis, and his father, Willis Kirk, the great drummer and instructor who's played with the Montgomery Brothers and even sitting in with Charlie Parker when he was young. Who else? J.J. Johnson. I'm curious, what was the scene like in terms of club life, and also when you were attending school there, and then also the other faculty members besides David Baker and George Russell, whom you got to hang out with?
Yeah, so Bloomington is really small, but there was a couple places that people would play, and sometimes the students would play, or the guest artists that the school would bring in would play. So one was Bear's Place. It's this pizza and beer place just right across the street from campus. And like Dave Liebman would play there because he did give a clinic, or, all these great, incredible artists and musicians they'd have come to the small city, right? And there's also a place called Cafe Django. That was kind of like the students hang. They'd have little gigs there. I played there a few times with some of my fellow students. I actually started my own gig. This is the time I started like, well, let's put out some feelers and start my own gig. So I started my own gig. It was like a trio thing at Scholars Inn. I was given a chance to play there, get some martinis and make a little money and play these tunes that I'd been shedding, and I had never done that before, kind of starting to lead a little bit. There's a scene in Indianapolis, which is about an hour north. I never got to Indy and got plugged into the scene there. I was too busy with school, but I'd go to Indianapolis to the Jazz Kitchen. Yep. Go here. I saw Kurt Elling there. Nick Payton came there. Some other big names. So tried to go up there once in a while, but didn't really get established in that sense. There's definitely some music happening there at the time.
I'm curious, and this also kind of extends because I want to get to Miami, and the time's going here. And I'm going to stop here really quick. I always forget to mention this at the beginning of the video, but if anyone has any questions for myself or Jared, please put them in the comments, and we're going to start opening things up at the last 15 minutes for questions. So please let us know and put them in now so I don't forget. And I probably will anyways, but I'll try not to. But my question for you is, I have vivid recollections of when I was in school and guest artists would come and certain things that I learned, like, Joanne Brackeen came, and I remember several things that she said that stuck with me, and lots of guest artists. So I'm curious, while you were in college, at all the colleges that you've attended, who were some guest artists that you saw that really made an impact to help shape who you've become today as a musician and an educator and a composer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there's this experience that all my colleagues know at Whitworth. Whitworth, they'd have a guest artist concert every year. So they had Kenny Garrett, Eric Reed when I was there, and the last year was Terence Blanchard, right? So Terence came in, and Dan's like, "Okay, you're a senior. You sound good. We're gonna have you do Night in Tunisia with Terence Blanchard." I'm like, "Okay." Yeah. Super intimidating. And at this time, I was getting my classical stuff together for my recital. So I was totally not practicing or in the mindset of playing jazz. I just wanted to get through my classical recital. So we did this duo with Terence, which was fine. I did what I could. He was very generous, very kind and supportive of me. And at the end of the tune, I think I played my cadenza, and it sounded pretty good. Like, I'd worked some stuff out. And then he played his cadenza. And then he goes, ba-ba-do-do-do-do. And he looks at me, and I was just kind of had my eyes closed listening to him, and I was like, oh, he's looking at me. And then I responded, like, just kind of as a reaction, And then we went into the whole band, and Terence led this whole thing into the Saints Go Marching In, which was the end of the concert. And then we finished that tune, he finished his cadenza, and that was the end of the night, right? And then we all went out to dinner. The whole band went out to dinner with him, right? And so years later, what's funny about this to me is that was an awesome experience, because I realized that's the level, right? I went to Miami, and Terence was the artist in residence there. And I got the opportunity to study with him, composition and some trumpet stuff. And I think the first day I saw him, I was like, "Terence, do you remember when you were at Whitworth?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, man." He probably doesn't remember, but he was just so kind. And I just think it's interesting how that worked out. Full circle. Yeah.
Well, okay, so how did you make the leap from Indy to Miami?
Yeah, so at this time in Indiana, I was given a lot of stuff. I realized I needed to work out, because every week it's like, "Oh, learn giant steps. Here's all these concepts on giant steps. Cool. And we're going to do, this pentatonic lesson. And then we're going to work on rhythm changes. It's like really intense weeks, right? So I had notebooks full of stuff I needed to get together. So I wasn't hungry for school. And also the teaching assistant was really tough, like trying to do that. So I wasn't really interested in going to school, but I figured I have three options. I can move to like a scene. So like a lot of my friends were moving to Chicago, and they did move to Chicago, and they're doing all right. Most people graduate, go up to that city, or maybe Indy. Maybe they stay in Indy for a little bit. Or get a teaching gig, right? Which I didn't have a lot of experience still, teaching a little bit more. Or maybe go to school. And so I applied to University of Miami, and I applied to the University of Illinois. Tito Carrillo teaches there, great jazz trumpet player. And in Miami, it's like, I only want to study with people who I want to, who are even at a higher level, and that I can really get, again, kind of be the worst player, or try to be, And so I dug Brian's concepts, because I was already transcribing him and checking out all his records, all his Latin stuff, collaborations on that.
You're talking about Brian Lynch.
Brian Lynch, yeah, the professor of jazz trumpet at Miami. And I got a letter from Miami. It was just like a full ride, teaching assistant, and I just couldn't believe it. Because I wasn't super interested in going to school, but I was like, well, if it's going to get paid for, and I don't have anything holding me back from this opportunity, maybe this is a good time to do this. Because it's like, it was always my goal to maybe get to that level with education. And here are some of my colleagues at Indiana getting their doctorate, and they're in their mid-40s, and they got 3 kids, and they bought a house in Bloomington. Like, that's like a huge thing. Like, and imagine,
I know.
Yeah. And I'm like, I imagine that's very difficult. So if I can get this kind of done, and it's like full ride, study with Brian, live in Miami. There's a scene there. I got to go visit there. I got to check everything out. Why not? Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I want to talk about, let's get down to Miami. So I would like to know about when you were attending school there, what was the scene like in terms of club life? I've heard various things from several different people over the years, but I'd like to hear your opinion. And then also, who else was on the faculty at the time of University of Miami when you were there studying?
Yeah. So I mentioned a few of the faculty already. Chuck Bergeron was there, great bass player. Yeah, I know he's spent some time up here.
He's been here, yeah.
A lot of people know of Chuck. I got to play in Chuck's group early on. That he kind of ran a sextet where we would compose and play. And Whit was there. Those were the earlier ones, and I thought Dave Douglas would be there too, because when I did my audition, it's like we have Dave Douglas as an artist in residence. We've got Terence Blanchard as an artist in residence, and you'd study mainly with Brian Lynch. It's like the holy trinity.
Yeah, I don't know, not so great
at the time. But Dave wasn't there when I showed up. But I was like, oh, Brian and Terence is cool. And you know, I can only say my experience. So the scene, like there is a scene around the school, and so I kind of got plugged into that, kind of like, oh, I'm an assistant to Brian Lynch, and so I'd sub for him or get plugged into some big bands. And what's cool about Miami is there are big bands, and they pay well when people put them together, and they're at the highest level where we're all just sight reading. And I had never experienced this before. Just being thrown on the bandstand, you're going to sight read 2 hours worth of big band music and get paid $125 or $200 at the end of the night. That feels pretty good, you know. And with Miami, there's a lot of festivals. There's a lot of outdoor concert series because the weather's nice almost all year round. Summer it gets a little too intense, right? People kind of take off or lay low in the summer. And there's some clubs. There was a club there, it just closed unfortunately, Le Chat Noir, where the professors would play or guest artists would come down from New York. And I played there a few times and did a few tours. When I moved up here, I did a few tours and go back to Miami and play there. The Open Stage is another one. They closed. I think they're still an organization, but their venue closed, and they're looking for something else. A lot of transition, as you know, with all these different cities. But there's definitely a scene there, and it's very different. The level is very high in general, which is good because you need to get certain things together, and you want to be put in these situations, I think, as a musician. So again, most of the time, especially my first year, it's like, okay, I know I'm the weakest one. I'm missing the rhythms and I'm missing these charts. But being in those situations, you will grow and learn if you have the right mindset. Yeah.
Well, I know just from our association, and I'm full-time doing all the stuff, and you're full-time, but every now and then our spheres collide. But I'm always seeing stuff that you're doing online, and what I like about your playing, which is obviously at a high level, but aside from the playing, you're constantly writing, and you're constantly writing your own stuff. And that's there are many wonderful musicians here and trumpet players here in the Northwest, but I think you're probably one of the more active composers out of the trumpet players here in the Northwest that I've seen so far. This is just totally my opinion, and I'm not trying to talk trash about anyone. That's just what I notice. I'm curious if that is from being around folks like Brian and Terence, who are also prolific composers. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that's probably right, and I appreciate that statement. Yeah, I think so, because I still look up to them. I still learn from them. I recorded all these lessons. I have a database of lessons that when I'm feeling down, I feel inspired by when I go listen to them. And it's like, you know, there's one thing about being a musician, and that's a huge achievement, to become a great musician, technique, understand the music, learn standards, and then to be creative, I think, and to create your own music, and to be influenced by all these mentors or the recordings that came before you. And so that's what they do. Yeah, they do their own music. They can play they know all the tunes, they know all the standards. Kenny Barron came in, they'd sit in with Kenny and he'd call the tunes and they just all play together. But then they have all their own records, they're on all their own projects. And I think that's an important component. At least some of that. You know, it's not that I don't like standards, I love standards. But to start develop your own arrangements and your own tunes. So I had to do these recitals when I was at Miami, and it was always like, okay, I'm going to use this recital to do original music, you know. And I was I was encouraged by Chuck Bergeron, who was my early small band director, and then Terence. We talked about compositions and kind of break things down. He gave us compositional techniques to kind of experiment. He did this class with us where he's like, okay, you guys have 45 minutes to write a tune. We'll see you in 45 minutes. And I'm like, what the heck? You know, how do you do that? And most of us scribbled out something. But I still think about all the tunes we did tonight are 45-minute tunes. Like, let's just do this, you know? And so, yeah, I think that's important, to be a musician, to be creating music, to be putting music out there, and to always be trying to push forward in some way.
Yeah. A couple things come to mind when after what you just said. One is we had David Marriott on here not too long ago. He said standing still is moving backwards, which I think is a good point, you know. And also, too, I think we've had Julian Priester on here several times, and he's always talked about, improvisation is basically spontaneous composition. So really, composing and improvisation are one and the same, with the caveat of, with composing, you have time to think and make edits and change, whereas in improvisation with other people in real time, you don't have that luxury, So you're kind of working on both skill sets simultaneously when whether you're working on composing or whether you're working on developing melodies for improvisation. It's kind of the same process. Thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's very similar. And I think, at least my goals when I kind of write like the tunes we're going to do today, it's like, let's write a new melody on this chord progression that I want to really learn and internalize. And I'm having some of my students do this too. It's like, okay, I'm struggling with this chord progression, but I'm learning the tune. But if I write my own melody, I'll get deeper into it. Or if I can go to the piano and comp through it a little bit. I think that's important. And a lot of the language I use in the tunes are things I'm either practicing or want to have become part of my vocabulary. So those two are not separate. And I think that's important too, is that your vocabulary as an improviser, it doesn't need to match exactly what you're trying to write, but there's a thread that makes sense being woven through the composition and the improvisation. Yeah, and that's something that Terence hit home a lot with us, is like, how does your improvisation, how is it influenced by your composition and vice versa? Right. Are they related? Is there a concept when people listen to this?
Yeah. Wonderful. All right, we're getting close to that time. Does anybody have any questions at this point? If we do, yes. All right, so the question is, Jared mentioned not to play the same way in jazz versus jazz music, or a jazz style versus a swing style. And the question is, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so this is back when I was in my early undergraduate days. And so I was being hip to all these like concepts like the diminished scale and the altered scale and all these flat nines, sharp nines, flat five, flat nines, all those fancy things, all the extensions in the world. It's like, rather than play C major 7, let's play D triad over that. Ooh, that's nice, right? And so this was all fresh and new to me, right? And so it's like, oh, I get to play in this band, and I get to here's a G dominant 7. And so I'd play the diminished scale. Oh, that doesn't sound good. That didn't work out. What's going on here? I was told that you can do this on G dominant. Well, it's like, no, they're comping G dominant. These concepts were not present in the 30s and 40s in the music. And that's basically the style that we're playing. We're playing 40s, and that music continued for a long time, because obviously that was like the most popular musical style. And then the concepts I was dealing with were like bebop concepts. These were influenced by Dizzy and Charlie Parker. They're talking about extensions and alterations, right? And so no one told me this. I just learned musically that, oh, don't do that. That doesn't work. Yeah. And then I would listen to the other musicians, and I'd listen to not only harmony. The harmony was a big thing I was focusing on, but I'd listen to their rhythm. Like the guitar player, really great rhythm guitar player and lead guitar player, he'd kind of end his solo, ba-da, 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 and people would love it. These little hooks and these little lines. And I started like, well, let me practice that. I don't know what that is. No one ever gave me that, So those are some early lessons with swing. It's like, okay, like the rhythmic feel, the pulse, how you tell a story. Because in that music too, it's not like bebop or jazz where you'd play 2 or 3 choruses. It's like they'd give you half a chorus, maybe a full chorus if they wanted to feature you. So what you played was really important to make it like that's all you had. You know, it's more like just get it done, make it powerful and moving, rhythmic, and that's it. You don't have time to build and create and layer and all the stuff that we're going to do later, you know.
Wonderful. Other questions? Not at this time. Okay, we'll get there. If you have more questions, please keep them coming. All right. Well, so now currently you're here in the Northwest. How long have you moved to Tacoma first? When did you move to the Northwest?
Yeah, so I moved to Tacoma in 2015, August 2015. So this August will have been 6 years being in the Northwest, and I spent, as you know, a couple of years in Tacoma. You were one of the first musicians I met down there, and you were gracious enough to let me sit in with your group. And I think Max Holmberg kind of connected us because I had sat in with him at the Angry Beaver at one point. So I had already met Max, and you know, it was great being in Tacoma. And I don't see them as that far apart, Seattle, Tacoma. I know some people do.
Just a couple hours, depending on I-5.
Just a couple hours. And but you know, got to meet and play with Pete Crispleeb and Bill Ramsey and Andy Amdahl and David Deacon Joyner. I really admire and have played with him and his band and his projects and play in Olympia, you know, and still do. If they call me, I'll if I can do it, I'll do it, you know.
All the open clubs around.
Well, yeah. I mean, but the last couple of years, even though I had been living up north, I would make it possible because I admire those musicians so much. And also it's like, you know, these musicians have a legacy of their own, you know, to be sitting and playing these Nestico charts with people who've actually done it and can play it the right way. I want a piece of that.
Well, why? So you went from Miami to Tacoma. I'm curious. So you're in school at Miami. How did you get? What happened after Miami? What you were living down there? Or
yeah, I was living down there and I was working. I was doing a little teaching, not a lot of teaching, and I could have stayed, you know. And I thought about maybe moving to New York. I wasn't sure about that. Just wasn't sure. So it's like, you know, maybe go closer to home. Because I hadn't seen my family like more than once or twice a year during this, 5-year period, right? Sometimes couldn't even go back for Christmas because I'd be playing Christmas services in Miami. So decided to get a little closer to home, but not go back to Spokane. You know, a little bit of a bigger scene, maybe more opportunity teaching and playing wise. So that was part of that decision. And kind of making something happen over here. Because I had known a bit about the music scene here. I knew it was creative and active, and there were some opportunities. There's a lot I didn't know, though, too. I didn't know anybody. Yeah. That made it very difficult. I mean, I knew of people. I had seen Tom Marriott play at a jazz conference, but no one knew who I was, and I didn't know who they were, so it was like, that was very hard. Like moving to Chicago or New York would have gave me a better footing in the sense of knowing people, because a lot of my colleagues, Indiana and Miami, had gravitated, or even LA, you know. So that was difficult, like making new connections. You didn't grow up there, you didn't live there, and it's not impossible. It's just, it's going to take some time. So I didn't work or play for like a year, making things happen, trying to make things happen, going out to the Owl, like every time for 2 or 3 months, or the Angry Beaver, and making that drive and going to other people's gigs. I saw a bunch of your gigs and Tom's gigs, and go to Tula's and hang out there. Just everything I could to try to get something rolling eventually, and it did. Yeah. You know.
Well, I'm curious, moving from Miami then, why not Seattle? How did you settle on Tacoma? Why did that end up with that decision?
Yeah, well, Tacoma, you know, I thought it'd be a little more, a little cheaper in general. I don't know if that's the case, you know, but yeah, it just was a little bit more affordable. But then I started to get more activity happening in Seattle. Like I had a couple teaching gigs, part-time teaching gigs there, and I got some private students there. I started teaching at a studio up there, and so I was like all over the place. And so not that I'm really thankful for some opportunities like Ted Brown Music let me teach there, and I had a bunch of students there and some gigs happening in the area.
Aren't you still in the faculty for TCC, kind of, sort of, part-time?
I taught a trumpet student there a little bit. So I was there, and I was and I was the interim director at PLU. So there were some really awesome opportunities that happened while I was in Tacoma. But it just seemed like there was more things happening, and it just made sense to kind of gravitate more up north. But like I said, I come down for gigs and shows when I can, or play church services, play at First Press. I'm going to be here at First Press for Easter. They're opening for Easter. So, I'm just trying to stay active in both areas, but it seemed like the pull was happening more up there in general. Yeah.
All right. Well, I know your first album came out, Hallways came out, what year was this?
That was 2017.
2017. And you have another project in the works right now. You just told me the title, and I've forgotten it already. Tell me again. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's called Scene on the Scene.
All right. Can you talk about the project a little bit?
Yeah. So it's like, kind of based on being out there, being at jam sessions, collaborating with other musicians, being in community, going to the jams. Like, what does it mean being on the scene, putting your own gigs together like you do, meeting people, putting venues together. Like, this whole thing about being a music scene, I think is really important. And so the record kind of comes out of that a little bit, and it's a blend of arrangements and original compositions and a few standards. And I'm really excited about this project. I recorded it a few years ago, actually, so it's been sitting a little bit. And I just decided now was the time to try to move it forward. And it's a great band. It features the rhythm section that I've been playing with ever since I moved here, which includes Matt Jorgensen on the drums, Michael Glenn on the bass, and John Hansen on piano. And that band has had different horn players rotate in and out. We had a residency at Tula's, which is great. We do a monthly concert there where I'd write new tunes and play some of the stuff from Hallways. And that's where a lot of these compositions actually came about, is that through that experience. And I put together a session while Vincent Herring was in town. The great alto saxophonist has played with everybody and recorded with everybody. You can hear him with Freddie Hubbard, very fiery. I've been listening to him since I was in college with Scott Wendholt on trumpet. He's on some Scott Wendholt albums. So huge fan. And he was a part of this guest artist concert at Pacific Lutheran. And I just said, hey, would you want to do this? Send him the charts. We did it one day in the studio. We didn't even go the full day. Did about 2 takes of every tune and had a record, And it had been about time to kind of try to put something else out there, to try to not let too much time go by. And now I'm putting it out. The plan is to put it out on Origin Records this June. And I've created a Kickstarter campaign, a fundraising campaign to help finish the album. So the album is mixed, mastered. All the compositions are written. I paid the musicians. I paid for the studio time. So I've done the big, as you know, the big part. And now it's like, okay, got to push it forward, publicize it, print it. I'm still going to do, even though a lot of people listen to digital versions, I'm going to do a physical copy, a CD with the liner notes. And so I'm trying to get the necessary funds to kind of finish that. And that's up online. I think I got about, 18 days left to do that. And I'm really excited to get this music out there. There's some Tad Dameron tunes, who I'm a huge fan of. Mating Call is on there. I did an arrangement of theme from Love Story. Love Story is this movie from 1970, and Andy Williams did this theme that people know about. And this was an old project, an arranging project I did at Miami. I just had never recorded it or documented it. And during COVID, this whole pandemic, it's like, well, it's kind of, let's move music forward, and hopefully things will open up. And I've also been writing a lot of music, so it's like I already have the impetus for another project. I've got compositions. We're going to play one of them today called Dear Roy, which is a tribute to Roy Hargrove, who died a few years ago. Yeah. So I've got some more compositions I want to move forward with, and it was like, well, Jared, just finish one project at a time, because sometimes I like have 3 or 4 going and you don't ever finish them. Yeah. It's like, no, just focus on one.
Yeah, that's kind of the life as a musician. And again, this is totally just my opinion. Here in 2021, it's like to be successful and to make a life as a musician, particularly if you want to like have a living for yourself, you have to have lots. You have to be able to teach. You have to be able to play. You have to be able to wear all these different hats just to eke out, an existence. And if I'm not saying it's impossible, and because there's many fine musicians that do it, but the people that I notice, like yourself, you constantly have to be putting things together and piecing things together and making things work and finding a way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the more hats you wear, the more skills that you develop, I think the more valuable you become to the music community or the music ed community. And I've always kind of been a realist, and my goals have always shifted, to be honest, too, because when I started saying I don't want to do architecture, I want to be a music major, it was I want to be a music ed major and be a band director and be like my band director. But then it started to shift to like, well, maybe I'll move into higher ed, and maybe I'll try to move my playing as far as I can get it, And it's like putting the first record together, again, very influenced by Brian Lynch. He's like, you need to put out a record. This is a really important step as a musician and as an artist. And there's a lot of people who don't. And there's the financial part of it, of course, which you know of, that makes it difficult. But it's important to making a statement. And yeah, you have to really be into this lifestyle and develop these skills and kind of be obsessed with it in a certain way, in a healthy way,
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. People always see the end result. They always see, the gig or the solo or whatever it is, but I don't think people really have a full understanding of or appreciation of the sacrifice that many musicians have to make to play music at a very high level.
Yeah, it's like it's a 19-year-old success story, overnight success story. It's like that old joke. It's like, no, it's always kind of working on it, and always developing it, and putting yourself in situations that you're uncomfortable with is really important too. If you can find that, whether it's a school, people view school in a different way, but I didn't have a lot of that early schooling. I didn't have a great teacher like you or Tracy Knope down here. Like, I didn't have that experience. And so I needed all that education and those experiences a little bit later, and I try to encourage my students who are getting frustrated, because every one of my students sounds better than I did at their age. Right. Sometimes they sound better than I did when I was 21. So it's like, let's have some perspective, because some people get very comparative in music, and I think that's dangerous, trying to like compare yourself to such and such player with different experiences and a different upbringing and all that.
It's like with as saxophonists, we compare ourselves to John Coltrane. It's like we might as well just put the saxophone in the case and just walk away. You can't do that to yourself. It's you'll never get anything done that way. Right. But I'm curious, before we run out of time here, any more questions? Okay, cool. So if people want to check out your music or contribute, well, let's start with contributing to the upcoming album project. Where can they do that?
Yeah, so I'm not too savvy on Kickstarter, but it's on Kickstarter. The name of the project is called Scene on the Scene. I've linked it to my Facebook page, so if you want to get connected on Facebook or on Instagram, I'm at Instagram at Jared Hallways, and then I think on Facebook it's just Jared Hall or Jared Hall Trumpet, one or the other. So that's the best way, or my website is a great way to connect with me. It's www.jaredhall.net. So that's my website. And then, they can check that out. They can contact me. They can check out music. They can order the piano grip system book. They can listen to some music. Yeah. At
some point, are you going to compile all this information that you've got from all these wonderful teachers and put that out for, do you think there might be issue with some of the teachers in that fashion, or is that something maybe on the back burner that you're thinking about?
Well, I don't know if I would do it in the way that I'm going to take everything they've given me and put it out, but, because one of the most important things that my teachers gave me, especially Brian, wasn't necessarily like, here's this concept and practice this in all 12 keys. it was like process, which I don't know if you can necessarily like define and write in a book. He would take me along through his process. And a lot of times this didn't happen in lessons. Like a lot of times I'd show up for my 11 a.m. lesson on Tuesday and be like, man, I'm tired. Let's go get some coffee. I'm like, cool, let's get coffee. We just go get coffee and run into other students, have conversation. And that was lesson. But the real lesson happened when he's like, hey, Jared, come over Saturday. Let's do some playing. It's like 2:00, right? I'm like, cool. And go over there at 2, show up. We do some playing. We do some talking. It's about 5:36. Oh, let's get some dinner, So we go to dinner, come back around, 8 or something. He put on some recordings, listen to those, and then we'd start playing again. And then all of a sudden I'm like, it's 2 a.m. Like, Brian, I should probably go. Like, but he could hang all night. And that was very cool to have that happen. And that didn't happen with every one of his students, And I cherish those times. We did that a bunch of times, and I wouldn't expect it. It just kind of just happened, He didn't have to spend his time that way. And he learns from his students just like we learn from our students too, and we develop concepts. So, I think I am starting to work on some pedagogy, and it's starting to be like trumpet stuff, because some people want to just learn trumpet stuff from me, and some of it's jazz stuff, and starting to get really big. So I might do like some trumpet pedagogy, just addressing fundamentals on the horn, and my concepts that are influenced by my teachers, but not necessarily like cut and copy paste sort of thing. Right. And then the jazz concepts, very similar, which could be applied to multiple instruments, and just ways to practice things that I've learned. Just different ideas and way to put things together. Try to put some of that process in there, and use it as things that I really want to put it together for my students more than anything, and define my concepts that are really derived from all of my mentors, all of my teachers, and. But I'm hoping it doesn't take 6 years like the last book did.
Well, it's kind of the same as our playing, right? Where you have all these mentors and influences that influence our playing, and hopefully out of that we develop our own voice. And I've kind of noticed that too. Like, I mean, when I first started teaching, I tried to teach like the only influence I had was Tracy at the time, and that is not my personality. I cannot be that person. So you kind of, out of all these different teaching experiences that you've had, you kind of develop your own thing. I mean, it's kind of one and the same too. It's just interesting. Okay, before we're getting close to time here, before we wrap, any other questions? Okay, one more question for you, and you've kind of already answered this a little bit, but I'm just going to ask it anyways. So here you are as the musician that you are, the educator, the composer, the trumpeter, in 2021. If you were to talk to someone who's interested in thinking about becoming a musician, what would be some advice or things that you've found or lessons that you've learned that have been very beneficial to you to help you grow as a musician and an artist?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I've checked out almost all the interviews, and I know you asked this question, so it's definitely worth thinking about. But basically, you just have to have this deep passion for it. And well, I said obsession earlier, maybe not obsession, but a passion to where you always want to work on it despite your circumstances. I think that's the only way you're going to get longevity being a musician, whether you do it professionally or not, right? Meaning some musicians, and it's totally cool to each their own, some musicians only practice or only put the horn to their face when they've got something on the calendar, right? Which, so a lot of people haven't played during COVID, and that's cool, like do other things. For me, it's even if I wasn't a professional or doing this as a living, I'm going to play the trumpet. I just love the trumpet. I just love music. I love experimenting and creating on the trumpet in this sound format. And I think you have to dig deep to to figure out if that's what you're going to do. And my folks knew, because they would hear me practicing every day after school for an hour, which I thought was normal. Like, you own an instrument, you go to band, you need to take care of it, and you need to practice it. And I do an hour a day, and I was doing sports and I was working. Like, I was doing all this stuff. A lot of my kids today, not a lot of them, but some of them, it's like, did you practice? No. It's like, and some of them are very diligent, but some others, it's like, what have you been doing? you know. And I was pretty well-rounded as a kid. You know, I did a lot of different things, but there was always that drive. Or moving to a new scene. I don't know anybody. I don't have a job. I'm not connected. Should I just stop playing? No, like the first year here, I shed hard because I'm like, there's time here. And then let's go to the session tonight, right? Or let's go to the gig tomorrow night. Or let's try to sit in with so-and-so the next night if they'll let me, right? So you have to have this deep desire and this deep passion. You know, it doesn't mean don't take care of other things. Like, got to take care of your family. You got to pay your bills. You know, you got to do your schoolwork. You know, schoolwork is not an excuse not to practice. It's like, and even now, it's like, I do a lot of my practicing at night after these long days, teaching, playing, you know, doing a lot of online teaching now, which I'm thankful for. So, you know, there's not a lot of practice time, and I could probably just say, oh, it's fine. It'll be cool. I played with my students. But if I want to keep improving and growing, you always have to be working on the craft and just chipping away at the craft. That's the way Terence puts it. Just chip away, chip away. And we think, you know, a lot of students, you know, think a year is a long time. It's like, no, it's not a long time. You know, there's 12 keys, right? Learn all 12 keys. There's 12 months. One key a month. That's all you do. Sit in A major this month, you know, like, and it's like, oh, I can do that. It's like, well, you're going to get so much better after a year if you think about it that way, you know? So you just have to have this, I don't know how to describe it other than just a deep passion where you can't do anything other than that. And I had to be real with myself because you know, people were telling me, don't study music, do architecture, you'll do great. And that's fine. I probably would have been successful. But I also had a different quality and trait to work on this. And it's I don't know if it's difficult. I think it is difficult in some ways because you have to do a lot of different things. Yeah. You know, you have to prep the teaching materials. You got to make sure you're in shape for the gig. You got to write some new tunes. Like, I'm pretty much almost always doing music in some capacity. Yeah. And so it can't be this half-hearted approach. You won't probably do so well with that. Because there was a time, and Whit talks about this, is like when I was going to school in Miami, we'd go to class and then we'd do gigs 4 hours a night down on the beach. Every hotel had their own big band, right? And then we do sessions on the weekends, these recording sessions, these great albums, a lot of pop albums, right? A lot of Latin influence albums, and that doesn't exist anymore. Right? So all you had to do was play and show up, and you didn't even have to be that good because we needed a lot of musicians, right? Now it's like there's not a lot of opportunity. You have to create opportunity. You have to be great. You got to work on the craft. And I do a lot of different things, and it's more by choice because I don't know if I'd want to play only full time. Yeah. I've never experienced that, so I don't know, but I want to play half the time and I want to teach half the time, and I don't. You know, and I try to balance that out. Of course, there's not playing right now, but that's always been the case. Even though I could probably just teach and not really play, and maybe I'd be more successful in some ways. But it's like, no, I want to keep this healthy balance, you know. And also I want to pass on what I've learned, some things that I've learned from my teachers to these students who want to learn from me and the organizations I'm a part of. Yeah. So
wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our viewers for joining us. Like I said, this is streaming live both on Facebook and it'll also be up on YouTube if you want to check it out there. We're going to take a short break here, do a sound check, and then get started for our concert, which is going to start at 5 p.m. It's live here at the McMenamins Elks Temple in Tacoma in the Spanish Ballroom. It is in compliance with Washington State health regulations for COVID-19, so 25% capacity. Seating is first come, first served. So if you'd like to join us, get here soon, wear a mask. They're very on top of that, so be prepared and have a mask. And Jared and I have both prepared original compositions for this evening, so we're looking forward to that. And thank you so much. If you've been enjoying these interviews and the concerts that we do every single week, please consider making a donation to our organization. You can do that either via PayPal or Venmo or mailing a check. All that information is on the post at the beginning of this video. And we'll be right back shortly. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kareem.